Okay, people, good day. Hope everyone is well. So, as people know, I'm excited about my new book, and again, sort of the trilogy is all out and available. I'm going to put it down in the description bar below. I do have a 40% off on my sources book right now. It's going to go all the way till January. It's basically December 31st. And then also the new book just came out. I do have a 30% discount for that as well. And I thought I would say some things about my most recent book, maybe try to talk about this for a little while. And I wanted to start by talking about one of my other collections here, this Communication Uncovered book, and the aphorisms collection. I had a student respond to one of the aphorisms, okay? And the aphorism is titled, "Look 'em in the eyes." And it says, "Look 'em in the eyes. When you're dead, you will never see your friends and family again. Always remember this when you speak with them." And I had a student say to me something along the lines of, you know, that they kind of disagreed with that because they thought it was, it was a very atheistic statement. And I said, well, I kind of had this, well, how is that atheistic? And the person went, well, you never see your friends and family when you're dead. That means that there's no afterlife. And they just basically equated that with atheism. And I think that in some way, that's what this book is trying to redress or correct or try to tackle head on. I do not believe in life after death. Now, I'm not being dogmatic about it. There may be, I don't think there is. I don't think there is. I think when you die, you die. And non-being haunts being. I mean, we kind of came from nothing, and we're going to go back into the utterly unthinkable non-being of non-existence. Now, there's a big difference between never having been born and no longer existing. I mean, people who no longer exist, they're entitled to all those prerogatives that come with being an existing human being. That is, they make their mark, however massive or minuscule, on the world around them in various ways, shaping people's beliefs, practices, maybe leaving artistic things, making scientific discoveries, contributing in all kinds of, sort of this "it's a wonderful life" kind of way. And, like I said, I think I'm trying to make room for a robust, grounded spirituality that has no need for life after death. And it has no need for a God who is like a being who accepts prayers and it could play favorites. Nothing like that. The deists, the Stoics, the mystics, the people who realize there is a kind of sacredness to life itself, the majesty of it all, and it's beyond any need of human justification. I think that's that's a bitter pill for human beings, to accept that life is beyond the need of human justification. I think we try to give arguments for, is life justified or not, whatever that means. We say, well, music makes it justified. Or I think for many kinds of religious people, there is no justification for life because there's so much injustice, there's so much hardship, there's so much loss, there's so much luck of the draw. And if there isn't life after death, then they think this is just a horrible, unfair situation. And I think there is a lot of suffering. There is a lot of just horrible misery in the world. And this is the world is a horrible, horrible place, but it's also magnificent. If I say it's self-justifying, I just mean it's beyond any need of human justification. I think for me, and I've been on this project for a while. I know a lot of people have heard me talk on my channel over the years about death acceptance. And, it was a lot in my last book. There's so much of this. I mean, these 3 books really do hang together. I mean, if you want to anybody wants to get a sense of what exactly I'm trying to argue, get these 3 books. My first book, basically my dissertation, Sources, was about 10 years later. And then now this How Non-Being Haunts Being is another 10 years later. So it basically spans about 20 some years. And I think people imagine that once you fully accept death, you're going to slide into nihilism. They're going to go, oh boy, it's nihilism. It's going to become individual stab and grab kind of, I'm just going to worry about my own little sack of skin's interest, something like this. And I disagree. I think there's a different kind of nihilism. There's a kind of nihilism that comes from just not being open to genuine inquiry and imagining that you're going to hide from your own sense of the truth of things by appealing to religious dogma, or, being unwilling to even entertain ideas outside of the kind of dogma one was raised into. That's a very different kind of nihilism. That's like a despair. I think I understand the concern. I really do. That people who think that there is a nihilism that is waiting those who come to terms with the fact that there very likely is no life after death. My response to that would be, no, it's not inevitable. It's not necessary. It all depends upon how you understand the self. If you think of yourself as just some sack of skin that's there, that's representing a world that's fully, completely what it is, independent of you, and you just are like a happenstance there looking at it, and you might as well could have not been. And, if you think about it that way, well, then, yeah, you're going to have a very narrow self-understanding, and I think a kind of nihilism maybe slides in. If you have a very different understanding of self, if you see yourself as a place and moment of everything that's ever existed, and that you are part of the way the world itself can be what it is, everything from sunsets to rainbows to distances. I mean, there's lots of ways in which our bodies, in having the forward that they have, having the range of, I guess, sensory modalities that open space and time in different ways, and then the intersections between the senses, between the sense of sight, sense of hearing, and the sense of touch, it affords all kinds of possibilities for people to make the world partly what it is because we're here. That is, we're part and parcel of a cosmos that, how would you say it? The illusion is that the world is just like a thing over there, and I'm a thing over here, and I'm just representing it. There are some ways in which that's true. I mean, my eye does represent certain kinds of things, but there are many sorts of relations where my body is constituting those, right? It's making them possible. It's actualizing certain possibilities. When I enter a room, I can look at a wall. Like right now, look around. I mean, look at any wall. Your eyes are arguably representing in some sort of select, there's a neurophysiology, there's all kinds of abstracting, there's, the retinal images are doing all, the occipital lobe is doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of processes going on, but the actual sense of the distance, you see it, like the wall is like represented at a certain distance by your sense of vision. And yet, you're doing more than representing those distances, because your feet and your head, your body, you can actually change what those distances are. There's, I'm going to try this totally different way. And again, these aren't things that are in the book. A lot of what I'm talking about here is sort of ways of thinking about and supplementing, for those who are reading the book right now, there's ways to sort of maybe add to some of the discussion. There's like an old philosophical sort of struggle with, can you prove that other minds exist? I mean, it's weird the number of people who really struggled with that issue over the centuries of, can you prove that it's not just a solipsistic world, and that each one of us are sort of, in our own world, and everyone else is kind of illusory or an automaton, or, potentially just a kind of manufactured illusion from each person's mind. Then we say, well, aren't there other minds? And I think part of the difficulty is that there is a sense in which each one of us is the world worlding. That is, we're the way the world worlds. The world opens to itself through bodies that have a forward, that have sensory capacities to make room for those situations in which people find themselves. And because when someone dies, an entire world of relations disappears, of certain distances, of certain configurations. Those disappear. So there is a sense in which, yeah, a person is an entire world, and a whole world disappears when someone dies. Now, it's not the world. I mean, I think I think we can be serious, scientifically objective sort of materialists about lots of things. We're just going to have to get really tricky and sophisticated when we start to deal with something like life and mind, consciousness, and language. Those are always going to have to deal with various forms of absence, of incompleteness, of non-being. Right? You're not going to be able to get at what life is independent of all of the ways that modes of absence characterize life. And it's everything from like needing commerce with the larger environment, needing nutrients to stay alive. That is partly what isn't me is what makes me possible. As a living being, I'm haunted by needs, by absences, by desires. And we have like orifices, right? Like we have holes in our body where things, we feed, we breathe. It's I think people are just so deeply confused in who they think they really are. I think they're convinced that they're just a sack of skin, that they're just a little body representing the world. They seem not to fully grasp that they're a worlding. You've never not been in a situation. I mean, I guess short of dreamless sleep, and then other people could tell you the situation you were in. But by the time you find yourself, you've always already been, by the time you come to self-awareness, right? Like none of us were in the womb going, wow, it's hot in here, I can't wait to get out. No, it's, I don't know how, 2 or 3 or 4, somewhere in there, it's sort of crystallized that I was here and there was a world over there, and that sort of oceanic dissolve of separations, that sort of breaks, right? You have this kind of fault line or a crack or a crevice where now there's a kind of an infection of nothing, where again there's separated out, I'm over here and the world is over there. And by the time you find yourself, you've already been, for a long time, you were underway. And then as you're approaching death, it'll be like, I'm dying. You'll never really get to I'm dead. If you get to I'm dead, you're not yet. And what that means is that life is a kind of Mobius strip that only opens to itself from the inside. It's like a paradox. Reality itself, paradoxically, has an eternality because it only opens from the inside. It's like there is no outside. There can't be an outside to the universe. There can't be an outside. If you say the outside, well, what's on the outside of that? What's on the other side of that one then? I mean, the closest thing to the outside of the universe is something like the back of your head. Right? It's all inside. It's all inside. It's, we're a walking straw. You have a hole on one end, a hole on the other, and you kind of like an alimentary canal walking through another kind of river, filtering it out in various ways. Yeah, we're a kind of Mobius straw that not only sheds the outer layer of the straw, but the inner layers as well. And it's sort of shedding layers while it's moving through other kinds of rivers, other kinds of material that is, again, changing and animated. Let me say some things about the book. There's a search inside function. I think at the Barnes and Noble you can see a little bit of it, and at Amazon they have. And if you go to the hardback, you can get some of the chapters. But basically, it's got 5 chapters, and the first one, I'm kind of giving a rough sketch of first the main arguments, and I try to talk about those in the most recent video, right? Prior to this one, some of the talks that I gave at NCA. where, just talking about like insurance, insurance is such a great example, or watching athletics, or, when you look at the whole world of antiquing, they're all shot through with different kinds of absence, incompleteness, non-being, and whatnot. But in the first chapter, I try to look at like 5 people who have tackled problems of nothing and non-being in pretty significant ways. It's not trying to give like a summary statement of, all the literature on nothingness or something like that. It's not doing that. It's looking again at just these 5 thinkers, because each of them have tackled it in certain ways that I found, very useful for my project. And, they've sort of set it up. And the goal isn't to winnow down the one right definition of non-being. It's to try to see some of the important connections, differences, the relations between their different thinkings, and to sort of lay those out and to then set myself up right for the rest of the book. But it's Henri Bergson and his little section on the knot is really wonderful stuff there. And then I look at Martin Heidegger and some of his stuff from What is Metaphysics. And then I look at Jean-Paul Sartre. Being in Nothingness was a major influence on me when I was a graduate student, and it still was a pretty major, probably one of the more significant influences in this book. The title is kind of a riff on Sartre. And it's funny, the book was actually, it was done on a sabbatical like a year ago, and the sabbatical proposal, the title of the book was Nothing Exists. Nothing Exists. And that was the title all the way through. It was accepted for publication. It went out for review. I got it back. Everything was good to go. And then in the final stages, it was the marketing people were like, no, we can't have that. It doesn't give people enough information. You need more. And we went, okay, well, let's change it to How Non-Being Haunts Being. And then I gave the subtitle as well, this on possibilities, morality, and death acceptance. And it really worked. Okay, so then I do Sartre. And then I go on and talk about Kenneth Burke. Burke is really an interesting character because he's done so much on the don't and on the no, rather than dealing with these kinds of metaphysical problems of, from where comes non-being. And he really disagrees with Heidegger. I think he thinks Heidegger, with his nothing noths, and this kind of metaphysical claim that, our ability to gainsay or to negate actually has an origin in a more substantial metaphysical ground of nothing. Burke's really skeptical of that. And he's like, no. What happens is there's a kind of what he calls the hortatory don't, the thou shalt nots. And the child is surrounded by this flurry of negativity of the parents saying don't and not and don't, again, all these different commands of negativity. And that because the command is given at one time and the obedience is at another, there is this gap in time which allows for the self-relation that we know as conscience, right? I mean, think about it. You're told do not commit adultery before you even know or are in any position, before you know what that is or are in any position to be acting upon that. And yet we are exposed to that, those statements. And then, we give vows, we say we won't do things, we give promises. And there's a kind of time that opens up, again, between the me who makes the vow or receives the command and then the time in which I act upon it. So in some places, Burke talks about gravity sort of like as a place where the command and the obedience happen at the same time, or like the salivation of Pavlov's dog even. It's as if the command and the obedience sort of align in a temporal moment. Whereas, language with its particular kind of commands and possibilities to either follow up on them and say yes to them or say no to them, imply a certain kind of self-consciousness. And then the last person I deal with, it was a total change of gear, like leap head out of all the sort of philosophical stuff, and it's Terrence Deacon, and I look at his incomplete nature. Certainly not the whole book. I just, for me, Deacon's work is really important in showing that you can give robust accounts of mind, and you're going to have to deal with problems of incompleteness and absence. He gives this wonderful example of skipping a stone on water and how, a child will try to skip a stone. But when you get to, that kind of radical improbability state of, getting a stone to skip, and what is it that what is it that is causing that? You're going to have to include something like intention, that is, a possible future is driving that. It's not just like the scientific analysis that would be involved in trying to measure what were the particular physical forces that led that stone to get on that beach originally. That's a very different question than the child with intention seeing if it can skip the stone. That is, the child is imagining a possible future and trying to actualize that. And it may be from having witnessed someone else do it at a different beach years earlier. See, there's going to be significant gaps in the temporal connections that we think of as causal connections. And we're going to have to be able to deal with, again, some of the ways that organisms as sophisticated as we are would have these sort of strange loop, to use Douglas Hofstadter's concept. There's a strange loopiness to our ability to see, to hear, to use our hands to actualize various possibilities in the auditory or visual field. And those introduce forms of, of meaningful action, of agency. We're not just pushed along like a ping pong ball on water. And so that first, and that's the thing. Okay, so I'll just wrap up on that first chapter and say that I think that's the most significant point of the first chapter, is that as different as all five of these thinkers are, and they're all very different, coming from different backgrounds and orientations. Some are atheistic, some are agnostic, some are definitely in the not wanting to be called atheist. Heidegger really disagrees with Sartre's characterization. Deacon is, professed naturalist. But across all of that, all of these thinkers agree that somehow humans suffer an agency and they experience something like decision making. And it's not epiphenomenal. It's not illusory. No, it's real. It's here for this world. I mean, that's part of the, there's like two dogmas that I'm trying to cut against very broadly just in the book. There's one dogma, kind of like a religious dogma, that says, oh, there's free will, but free will was given from a God who's right now giving you this big test, and the test is life. And then the real judgment happens at the end of life. And then you're going to see, I don't know, you're going to talk with God or something. You're going to hang out in the afterlife, or you're going to go to hell because you weren't a believer. There's all this kind of stuff. Because you didn't choose well with God's, the free will that he gave you. The other dogma would be the sort of reductive scientific materialism, which basically says that there is no choice, there is no agency, and all of that is just epiphenomenal. It's illusory. That it's already happened in some way, and it's just unfolding, and we are without any ability to actually decide, because there's always been, earlier forms of setup and causality that lead any of this to be sort of already determined before we experience something like our agency. And, again, anyone's familiar with my work, I would say, no. You have to go and be rigorous from a historical standard. You need to go back and look at the alphabet. You're going to need to look at writing. You have to talk about agriculture and all the different ways in which humans have modified their environment. And then that has acted back upon various developments in human culture. And so, the kind of agency that I'm after doesn't really come from on high. It comes over thousands and thousands of years. I mean, in some way, it's built into the body. I mean, the human body itself is it's a showcase of different kinds of agentative possibilities, especially because, I can touch my eyes, I can sort of put my ears up to, get a better sound of something. I can move closer to something, or, I have to deal with predator and prey and all this kind of stuff just as an organism. But humans have language that gives an agentive function that allowed for creative tool use and tool creation. And as I say, over thousands of years now, human agency has been radically affected by things like calendars, clocks. We have now, ways of instrumenting our action, and we can even, preemptively cut against what we know will be our own weakness. I think, as much as Daniel Dennett, I think his earlier stuff, on his book Elbow Room on the varieties of free will worth wanting. I mean, I think he was doing it better there, where he was talking about, it's not the plane where, the free will is the ability to drive the plane no matter the weather. No, it's the ability to say, okay, the weather's bad. I guess I'm going to wait, or I'm going to drive around the storm. There's ability to use technologies to then realize possibilities, and again, to sort of actualize them. And so again, I think that's really one of the more important points in the first chapter, is to get at, again, the range of different kinds of absence, incompleteness, non-being, negation, all these different phenomena that are both, they're social, they're psychological, but they're also partly metaphysical. That is, we are that part of the cosmos that consciously entertains what is not, that is, what might be. And some of those never actually happen. I mean, some people try to realize a possibility and it never comes to fruition, right? It's that, the football kick that doesn't make it into the goalpost or something like this. And so again, that's the first chapter. The second chapter then goes into, again, an argument. It's somewhat a little bit more geared against the Kenneth Burke argument. Burke's suggesting that, no, you only find the no and the don't making way for the is not, but there is no non-being outside of language or symbols. So says Burke. Burke says it's a unique symptom of language. And I think that as much as he's insightful in a lot of ways, and there is insight, there's a problem with it on the very get-go, because, well, we are part of nature. Even if it is true, just for argument's sake, which I don't think it is, but even if it is true, just for argument's sake, that it's only in language, well, language is part of the cosmos. We just happen to be those organisms where language is happening. And again, those organisms are, again, part of nature. There isn't anything that isn't part of nature. I mean, we use the word natural sometimes as like a normative claim, like, hey, that's not natural, and we mean don't do it. But there's another sense in which everything is part of nature, right? Even the most odd kind of inventions that we have, I mean, chemical wastes and, nuclear bombs are natural, if only that we're that part of nature which has realized those possibilities. Right? So I try in the second part, I guess I would say the other thing is that I think, so it's not only is it larger than that, but I think that we can find that there are lots of other forms of non-being, forms of absence and incompleteness that characterize the body. The body itself, as alive, is always haunted by having to be its own project. That is, you have things that you have to do, they're still outstanding. That you're a situation that is moving toward fulfillment. And because there's always the was and the will be, because we live in that world of the will be and what should be and what might be and could be, we're always with projects still outstanding. Like, what will you do then? And then what will you do? And then you're going to retire. Well, what will you do in your retirement? We have this whole sense of, again, of still having something outstanding. Only the dead are fully complete. The dead are without any non-being. But as long as you're alive, you're still haunted by projects. I think one of the most robust, sort of rigorous examples of, well, there's two that I try to lay out in the bodily chapter, but one would be dreamless sleep, that every night we give up on all sort of conscious cares and we recede into dreamless sleep. And during dreamless sleep, it's not a direct experience that we have. It's not like there I am consciously experiencing my own dreamless sleep. No, but I wake up and I'm aware of a gap and a discontinuity, a kind of a place where, in a moment when I was not. And sometimes it can be so refreshing. This to wake up and go, oh, I was tired, and now I'm really refreshed. And that we can open to the awareness of the universally shared non-experience that dreamless sleep is. That each of us are dreamless sleepers, and a conscious wake experience it's only part of the story of the human being. It's a humbling truth about us that we're partly characterized by a non-being, to such an extent that in order to maintain something like mental life, we have to give it up. day by day, at least for a little while. You can't stay awake without sleep break, without it really compromising your mental health. I mean, you could have insomnia for a little while, maybe even a week or a couple of weeks. Sleep deprivation could be used as a form of torture, and soon enough, you're going to have, serious, like, mental incapacities, maybe even, other forms of real trouble from radical forms of sleep deprivation. Another form of non-being is, and I got to get at this because this really gets at some of the main issues. There's a difference between us being aware of an absence and me being aware of those absences by which awareness itself becomes possible. See, there's different kinds of absences. So there's I can look out in the garage and I can see my car's not there. Or I can go, oh, look, my keys are not in my pocket. I have the sense of the non-being of something by being able to think about it, right? Again, thought traffics in the possibility of it being there or not. And I ask, is the car in the garage? And I say, it's not. And so I experience the absence of the car in there. But that's very different than all of the ways that awareness itself is possible. That is, awareness itself is possible by various forms of self-effacement, right? That is, take the very simple example of seeing and looking out in the world. When I look out in the world, one of the things I don't see are my own eyes. That is, I see the situations, the larger environments. I can see the distances rolling out the window or to various walls. And when I'm doing that, I'm looking at things, and I could then discover in a certain way that my eyes are absent. That is, that my eyes are doing the seeing. And it may be that, I can imagine organisms, maybe like fish, are they able to think about the fact that their eyes are doing the seeing? I don't know, but we can. So I can become aware of that self-effacing absence, which makes seeing itself possible. So again, there's a difference between those absences of which we're aware versus being aware of how awareness itself depends upon modes of absence and incompleteness. The words that we speak, they're naturally self-evanishing. They cover over themselves as just organismal sounds, and instead we deal on the backside of the sounds, on the hither side, in the meaning, in the space-time horizon, right? When you turn on a radio and it's a foreign tongue, you can just hear one sound and another sound. They just kind of appear and vanish. But for those who speak that language, it's an elongated stretch, right? It's an opening. Right? That's why Drew Leader, when he writes the book called The Absent Body, he wants to talk about the difference between the body as it's lived. The body as it's lived is a situation. It's an environment. You're the ongoing project of having to be the environment that's being opened by way of your sensory capacities in your body. The body as a cadaver, the body as a medical object, right? That's, I think, unfortunately, what most of us sort of think about when we think of the body. We think of the body, again, as a thing, as just like it's occupying space, just like a geometric object is. But it doesn't. The Archimedes crown, right? The irregularity of the crown. We could see what the volume that the crown occupies by putting it in the water and seeing how much water gets displaced. If you do that with your own body and try to say, well, that's how my body occupies space, look at the volume it occupies, that's not at all how you occupy space. I mean, we could talk about it that way and we could try to reduce it down to that. But there's another sense in which, no, you occupy space as a flight outside yourself, right? That you could be in too confined of a space. I mean, if I take this pen, I can put it in a little drawer and it doesn't feel like it's being trapped and cooped up. Whereas we need space to roam around in. We need others. We have, we literally are geared in for others. I mean, not only did you come into the world by coming out of another person, look how wild that is. Every person, it's like there were people having sex, and now here we are. I mean, you literally came into the world by coming out of another person, but you have organs in your body that we could never understand by a kind of reductive analysis of just your body in isolation. That is, your sex organs, if you try to look at them and ask, well, how exactly do those sex organs relate to the rest of your body? It's a worthwhile question. It's a scientifically valid question. And there's a lot to be said about hormones and all that kind of stuff. But it's fascinating that our organs are somehow ontologically geared into possible relations with others that could produce another person. That is, human beings are haunted by the kind of absence and incompleteness of possible procreation. Impossible procreation. The other, again, really robust example of bodily non-being, and this is why I was trying to get at that difference between awareness of an absence and understanding how awareness itself depends upon forms of absence and incompleteness. But it's Douglas Harding's work, on having no head. If you've ever looked at Harding's stuff, it's just really fantastic. Harding, he was in the Himalayan mountains and he looked around and he realized that where his head wasn't, the world was being made room for. And it was the greatest discovery of his life. And that is such a great book. I mean, anyone who's unfamiliar with the headless way, please, go learn about Harding. Harding is just such an interesting character. You can do exercises. He does the one-way pointing. So take your finger, your index finger, and put it out in front of you and sort of point your finger to where you think your face should be. Now, looking at your finger, try to look to what your finger is pointing to. Right? And he says what you see is there's nothing there. There's an emptiness. There's a clearing that makes room for everything. Yeah, you're a clearing that makes room for everything. Okay, then the third chapter, I try to get into language and communication and all the different ways that those are haunted by absence, incompleteness, negation, and non-being. And it's probably the most robust and maybe the most technical of the chapters, because there's so many ways in which language and linguistic structure, just the linguistic structure itself, is filled with absence, incompleteness, forms of non-being. You can never really analyze language fully just at the surface level at which it's occurring. Right? They're sometimes called the paradigmatic axis in linguistics. So you have the horizontal axis or the syntagmatic axis. That's the actual words that someone is uttering, and they're combined in a certain way, and that produces a meaning. But in order to have that be intelligible, it has to be able to be paraphrased or translated, put into other words, which means that there are absent possible substitutable words which make any words that are said the intelligible, meaningful words that they are. That is, the words aren't meaningful in their own right. They're meaningful in terms of their possible substitutable, paraphrasable, alternate expressions. Right? If I say a man walked down the street, and then a person says back to me, the man walked down the street, they say the exact same thing. I'm not sure if they've really understood. But if they say, you mean a guy, the guy got on his feet and walked up the avenue, I'll be like, okay, yeah, you do understand. So there's a sense in which I'm able to recognize the invariance across the variance, right? And the invariance is absent. What you get is just variation. I mean, this is partly why when you look at the inscription over Plato's Academy, it basically is in Greek, it's something along the lines of, let only geometers enter here. Because in order to study geometry, you have to study the triangle that isn't the particular triangle you can see with its different colored pen or the different lengths of or different thicknesses of the lines. You're supposed to imagine the ideal triangle, the triangle that somehow we're using these particular triangles in existence to look through to that perfect triangle, right? I think, again, language is so robustly filled with forms of absence. I mean, not only, is the word not the thing? We have this sort of obvious sense that Krzyzewski recognizes, but there's just, every word, when you see an image, you see a photograph, the photograph is of a person who isn't there. And even when they are there, that's not really them, right? I mean, there's a funny Picasso. I think people have heard this, right? That Picasso's there and he's painting a picture. He's doing a portrait in a sort of abstract Picasso way of this woman. And the husband comes home and says, "What is this?" And she says, "Oh, it's Picasso. He's doing my portrait." And the guy says, "What? That doesn't look anything like you." And he looks at Picasso. He says, "It doesn't look anything like my wife." And Picasso says, "What do you mean?" And guy gets out his wallet and he pulls out a little portrait there, and he has like a photograph, and he shows Picasso the photograph, and Picasso looks at the photo, looks at the wife, looks at the man, looks back at the photo, looks at the wife, goes to the man, "I didn't realize your wife was so small." Yeah, I mean, again, symbols abstract, they strategically omit. There's lots of omission that goes in, and that's how they work. They work their magic by invoking without having to have all the particulars. I mean, it's sort of like Umberto Eco's map. You know, the map maker makes a map and he shows it to the king, and then the king says, "No, this doesn't have my favorite orchard. You know, include the orchard on the map." And the map maker has to go back and make room for the orchard. And he says, "Okay, here's your map." And he says, "Oh no, I've realized too. My favorite river isn't prominently portrayed in there enough." And he keeps coming back to the king and showing him a new map. And the king keeps going, "Oh no, there was another thing that you should have included." And at a certain point, the map maker takes him over to the window. He points out. He says, "Look, sire, here's your map." And he says, "Oh, it's exactly what I wanted." Right? So there's a sense in which, maps, representations, symbols, they're abstractions, strategic omissions. They work by forms of absence and incompleteness. Now, I try to talk, at the beginning of that chapter anyway, about dreams and about mammalian play, because I think both of those forms are evolutionary precursors to language. If you want to understand the human evolution of language, how language began, you're going to need to get at the phenomena of dreams, because dreams are a kind of spontaneous symbolism where we actualize possibilities. That is the dream. And notice what's occurring in the dream is not really happening, at least not as we imagined it was while it was going on. When we wake up and we go, "Oh, that was just a dream," to call a dream is to recognize how non-being was haunting experience. That is, what we experienced inside the dream was very different than how we understand it once we've woken up. And a lot of this happened after Freud. I think before Freud, people understood dreams to have a kind of otherworldliness, whereas after Freud, we increasingly understood dreams to be somewhat psychological. And admittedly, I think once you get to Jung, you can get to things like there's a sort of collective unconscious that has to do with our dreams. And it may be that dreams are more than personal psychology, but I think the notion that they're a form of symbolism which, as much as there's something going on, there's something very real happening in a dream, there's various neurochemicals happening. The organism is undergoing various processes that are fully present. And you could say, like, from a certain scientific view, there's just fully actual processes happening, neurological activity. You have, again, sort of brain waves and certain, REM activity in the brain. And yet for the dreamer is experiencing something that's particularly what it is, but it's haunted by non-being. They wake up and go, those images were about a different place, a different time, people who weren't really in my head. If I'm dreaming about my dead grandmother, I wake up and go, "Oh, that's right, my grandmother is actually dead," even though she was in the dream. I don't think we can get at that from the fact that my grandmother is dead, even though in the dream she seemed alive. It seems, again, there's a different order of explanation than one we're going to get by just looking at the readout of the brain scan, right? Again, this fact of, when I'm having the dream, it's about someone who no longer is. Right? So again, dreams are just a robust example of non-being that predate language and are part of the body. Dreams are also very related to play, right? So, Gregory Bateson does such great work on this, on the way that play is an evolutionary precursor to language, partly because the organisms have to send like meta-communicative signals to one another to let them know that they're not meaning what they appear to be meaning. That is, he says the nip denotes the bite, but doesn't denote what the bite would denote, right? And I think a different way to say it is that when we watch plays, when we watch theater, we're watching people who are not what they really are. We see the characters rather than the actors or actresses. Or if we do see the actors and actresses, we see them in terms of something that they're not really. Like, think, is there really a Darth Vader? Is there really a Jean-Luc Picard? Is there, there's so many movies where, when you watch people on stage, when you watch combat and you watch fights, the punches, they mean a punch, but they don't mean what a punch would mean. They're representations meant to symbolically give a meaning, but it's all fiction. See, the human world is a world of fiction. It's a world of pretend, of many layers. If you take a child to a play and they're watching actors and actresses kiss on stage, you'd have to explain that those staged kisses, they mean a kiss, but they don't mean what a kiss would mean. Those actors and actresses aren't really in love with each other. Those are characters performing the fiction of love. Right? That so much of the human world is play and fantasy and fiction. Oodles and oodles of money get spent making movies, and movies are basically canned dreams. They're collective dreams. And to learn to speak a language is basically to learn to enter the waking dream that is a given person's life. Right? Language gives us access to that collective dream that we call culture. We call, again, reality in terms of shared values, beliefs, orientations. What's food, what's not food? How does one marry? How exactly is one to be employed? What's a meaningful life? I mean, these kinds of things are all part of the larger culture. And we gain, again, access into that waking dream by learning another's language. We partly gain entrance into their culture. The fourth chapter in here is on death and possibilities of human morality. It's a lot on just admitting that I don't know. I'm not claiming to know that there is no life after death, but I'm very skeptical. It doesn't make sense. Immortal souls, I'd much rather have people ask themselves about, can they discover their own headlessness? Can they realize that they're the emptiness which makes room for everything? Can they realize that they're a place and moment of everything that's ever existed? Can they realize that they are the way the world is worlding through their self-effacing body? That is much more interesting to me than, do you have an immortal soul and will it go on after your death? It's like people have been sold a bill of goods and they have a very shrimpy sense of self rather than an expansive understanding of their connection to the larger cosmos. They're, as Joseph Campbell would say, they're riding atop a whale while fishing for minnows. They're missing the spiritual significance of their own death, that they've been greatly liberated into this possibility by other people, and they're already more than they could ever achieve. You're already more than you could ever achieve. Much more. Just in being. That is, you are the way the sunset. Sunsets can't be themselves without your help. You lend your body and its positionality to do the work of giving this kind of reality we call the sunset. Some of it's like a difference between what could be called the doctrine of the immortality of the soul, which I'm very critical of, and the doctrine of what could be called life eternal. The doctrine of the immortality of the soul is something like it's about an individual soul substance and its continuance through life. And then after life, whatever it's going to go do, some sort of judgment and nearness or farness from God, something like this. Whereas, and I think it has to do with Gnosticism. There are Gnostic beliefs where people thought there was a kind of like an ether-like substance that it would get heavy if you did impure acts, and it would be lightened if you had a pure sort of intention and pure acts. And then if upon death, if it was pure enough, it would ascend upward into heaven. And if it were heavy enough or tainted, it would descend down into Hades and all this kind of stuff. I think, or into the darkness. And I think that no, get out of those. I remember my grandma saying stuff like, she was gonna she was going to talk to God. She has questions she wanted to answer. She wanted to get answered, and she was going to talk to God when she was dead. And I don't think you're ever going to get your questions in. I don't think that's going to happen. No, instead, I would go toward this notion of the doctrine of life eternal. That is, each person is a place and moment of the eternal opening to itself from a particular within the throes of finitude. It's not a panpsychism, nor is it something like a panentheism. And I'm certainly not giving a belief that we are all God. It's not. It's nothing like that. No, it's each person is a place and moment of the cosmos, right? And you're the way that it could open to itself from that particular vantage in space and in time. And the task, rather than living on forever with my own immortal soul, whatever that would mean, it's about opening and releasing both divinity in the details and to the miraculousness of the orderliness all around us, the beauty of it. I think as I've struggled with these issues over the last 15, 20 years, really trying to hammer out this position on death acceptance, the thing that it's done for me probably more than anything has made this life, this world, feel more and more sacralized, feel more and more vibrant. It's as if like the spiritual potency of this world has been re-enlivened by giving up any sense of you're going to be able to somehow commune with God or talk with God at a future time, some being, or you sit, be at the feet of something like that. No, it's more like, I think the work of Martin Buber, Willem Flusser. Flusser has some great stuff in there. I try to include some of this in the book where, he says, if you want to really feel like you want to feel the presence of God, you want to appreciate God, it's every other person. It's through their face. If you imagine that you love God, whatever that means, but you don't like people, or you think God plays favorites or something, I think you're out of touch. That the only way to really show gratitude for life and that you feel the spiritual sacredness of the world is to try to love every other person, even people you can't stand. Last chapter in the book is kind of a metaphysical speculation. I'm kind of doing a riff on some of the Alan Watts stuff about the one who's playing hide and seek on itself. And I try to problematize it. And I think, I don't need an agentative God who by will or by design brought the world into existence. I think I would go with more like Harding, a kind of mystery that no one knows. No one knows how or why any of this happened. But we can sort of speculate that it was like, for me, and again, the speculation is something like there was a kind of paradoxical I don't know what it is. We could call it the one. There was a kind of paradoxical one in pure symmetry, but that doesn't make sense because in order for there to be one, there has to be something to delimit it. And it's almost like this one, like tried to somehow remove contingency or to introduce the distance by which it could found itself, or it introduced the gap by which it could be delimited and actually be registered as one, but it failed and degenerated, it collapsed, and it blew into nothing but possibilities that took, billions of years for life then to, through various geometric tumbling. It's the orderliness. You don't have to have a being. It doesn't have to be a guy who responds to prayers. You need to recognize that there is a kind of orderliness that naturally precipitated life, and it deserves a kind of sacred reverence. And again, when I say it deserves a sacred reverence, let me see if I can talk about that a little more. I think there are experiences of gratitude that are being covered over as people put all their eggs in the basket of not only a God who's answering prayers, but something like a God who's going to serve justice in the end. I think that, it's very powerful as an anxiety buffer, to kind of imagine that there will be some amends made for all of the radical injustices.
not just all the dumb things that people have done to each other, the wars and all the stupid, violence that people have brought upon one another, but just the natural hardships. There's just so much, people being with luck of the draw of where you were born and everything else. I think as much as it's brutal and it's hard, there is a kind of gratitude that comes from recognizing that this is what you got. There isn't going to be some other way to make amends for it. There isn't going to be a sacrifice made to make amends for all the wrongdoing. See, I think a lot of it has to do with, I didn't really get at this enough, and now I'm about an hour in, and I'm not really ready to go back and rethread it all. But I guess a lot of it has to do with the way the not and the don't have tied into the institution of private property and what Burke calls the secret sacred sign of negativity. That is the mine, not yours. And once the entire world is shot through with mine and not yours, people have built their lives through institutionalizing forms of social inequality that now they psychologically need someone to make amends for their commitment to, again, partisan and or practices that have served certain interests over other interests. And there's a kind of encumbered guilt there. And I think people, they flee from their own complicity in forms of social injustice by appealing to religious dogma that helps alleviate their guilt. And it may be that we need afterlife beliefs for some of this because people don't know what to do with themselves, but it may be that there'd be kind of a dread that comes over people. Like if they fully give up on any notion of life after death and just come to terms with the fact that they're going to die and that we're all dying, we're dying together. That's the only community. There is one true community. It's the community of the dying. If they come to terms with that, they might actually experience that dread, and it would be such an anxiety that maybe people could wake up and start taking better care of each other. Realize that it's up to us now to do the best we can. To do the best we can. It's not about bringing about heaven on earth. It's nothing weird like that. It's about seeing to what extent we can accept the humble but very noble lot that humans have been sentenced to. We're a very humble lot. We're organisms that we feel pain and we're going to die. But we're noble. We're able to ask questions about how we relate to everything that's ever been. We're able to ask, what is the meaning of existence? Where did all this come from? And we're able to sort of bask in the glory of the mystery. Okay. Hope everyone is well. Take care.